we're here from the government. You signed this, and then you agree to let us basically do whatever we want. And that's, of course, what I did. I signed that document. And they proceeded to spend as much time as they felt necessary in our office, interviewing me, my colleagues, my staff, and going over the mounds of paperwork until they felt that, we had done a credible job.
Before we dive in, it's important to remember that the information we provide is for informational purposes only. Every situation is unique, and decisions regarding your health or legal matters should be made after consulting with your own doctor or lawyer. Our aim is to inform and empower, but personal circumstances require personalized advice. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, FindAGreatAttorney.com. If you or a loved one has been injured in an accident, finding the right lawyer can make all the difference in getting the compensation and support you deserve. Hi, welcome to another edition of Justice in Scrubs. I'm attorney Richard Hastings, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Dr. Jeff Michaelis.
And today we have a very interesting guest. Dr. Michael Spiegel is a rheumatologist and clinical researcher. We're going to discuss a lot of different issues, and I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Richard.
So why don't we start off by having you tell us about your personal journey and what inspired you to specialize in rheumatology?
So my personal journey starts when I was growing up in Queens Village, New York, and my parents wanted me to be a physician.
The family business. I should say the family business.
And so that was the impetus. And I was fortunate enough to be able to accomplish that goal. And from there, I did training in internal medicine. And then I did 2 extra years of training in rheumatology, which I completed in 1989. And in the 1990s, our treatment for arthritis, especially severe arthritis, was lacking. And a lot of our patients went on a trajectory to disability, chronic pain, and actually early demise. People with severe arthritis are unfortunately succumb to complications at a much younger age than their cohorts.
So why don't we back up for a second, because I'm sure a lot of people are unaware of what rheumatology is. So what does rheumatology cover?
So rheumatology covers arthritis, which of course 90+% of people interpret as having the usual aches and pains, especially as the people in this room age. But where we've made the changes that are remarkable that we'll talk about is in the more uncommon diseases, not rare diseases, but uncommon, such as rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis. But the more common diseases that everybody is aware of, even if they can't name it, is osteoarthritis or degenerative joint disease or degenerative disc disease. Unfortunately, medical science has not advanced significant treatments for the degenerative diseases. So the research that we're going to speak about today is what we call the inflammatory or systemic rheumatologic illnesses.
So basically, rheumatology involves connective tissues?
Correct. That includes the joints, the ligaments, tendons, the cartilage, and the bones. That would be the compilation of what a joint looks like.
So let's talk about your research. What part of medical medicine is your research focused on?
So our initial foray into rheumatology research was rheumatoid arthritis. And in 1999, the first biologic, and what a biologic means is a medication that you inject, either the patient or the provider injects. So a biologic is injectable, and it's based on something that already exists in our systems. So that were biologic. That's what the biologics were. And I didn't participate in the first biologic that was approved for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis. That was Enbrel in 1999-2000. But at that same time, I participated in the research for the second medication that came to the marketplace as a biologic for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, which was called Remicade or infliximab. And that's an intravenous drug. So that was in approximately the year 2000. I was asked by the company to recruit patients from my practice into the pivotal clinical trial to get Remicade approved for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis in the United States.
Let's talk about your research and your clinical trials. What is a clinical trial, and what fields is your clinical trial focused on?
So my clinical trial was focused on rheumatologic diseases, the most common which is rheumatoid arthritis. That's an inflammatory or systemic illness. So the immune system attacks the joints as if the joints were a foreign substance. And that's what autoimmune disease means. It means the person's immune system is attacking their joints or other organ parts as if their body was foreign to them.
And what consequences happen to the patient with this?
So prior to getting these drugs approved, which we'll talk about in a moment, severe rheumatoid arthritis and related diseases led to a trajectory, led to a path of disability, chronic pain, and early death.
And before these new medicines came out, that's what was in store for the patients.
If you had severe disease, that was what was in store for you.
Okay. And I just wanted to tell a quick story, and that is my mother, from a very young age, and I'm thinking maybe her 40s, developed rheumatoid arthritis. And it was, back in those days, completely crippling. I mean, her knuckles would all be inflamed, her knees, her ankles, her elbows, her shoulders. I mean, it was such a disgusting disease. And like you said, it's attacking all of these joints that she had. And she went in for these treatments, which really, in some cases, created more problems for her. Like, she had gold injected into her body, and the gold caused her to feel, like incredibly itchy all over, and that pain was worse than the arthritis pain. But her ultimate demise resulted from rheumatoid arthritis.
I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry that your mom had to suffer. Unfortunately, she became severely ill before we had these medications, which we will discuss, and really is one of the many modern miracles that have happened in the last 30 years.
Well, let's describe when you started the Remicade research and you got to see your patients improve. And you want to describe that? You have any good stories about that?
Oh, the stories are amazing. So first of all, clinical research is done in partnership with a pharmaceutical company. And the pharmaceutical companies are under the direction of the FDA, our government, and they have to do a rigorous scientific study to show that the drug is effective and safe. And if you don't pass muster with those studies, you do not get approval from the FDA, and you don't have a drug. So from the pharmaceutical industry's perspective, it's not unlike going to the casino, except with much, much more money at stake. So they've developed a drug. They've done early studies to show that this is promising. But in order to get the drug approved, they have to approach people like myself and my peers and colleagues who are doing the actual treatment of patients in their offices or clinics and say, we need patients from this drug, from this disease to go into a study. And that's how you get a drug approved in the United States. So I was approached by this pharmaceutical company that was manufacturing Remicade. And they asked me, do I have patients who would fit the study? And of course, since I treat rheumatoid arthritis, the answer was yeah. And so that was the pharmaceutical industry's perspective. Was I the right clinician, investigator to invite into the study? Then as the investigator, I have to show the government and the pharmaceutical industry that I've made the investment in the proper people to execute the study, because a clinical research study is profoundly complicated from the point of view of documentation and adhering to guidelines.
Can I ask a couple of questions? First of all, when you say that the pharmaceutical company has to make sure that the drug works, that predates the clinical trial.
So there are, excuse me, there are 3 clinical phases to get a drug approved, 1, 2, and 3. The first drug is a proof of concept. You, the pharmaceutical industry, Richard, have a drug, a molecule sitting on your shelf. You think it looks good, and you're going to take a very small number of patients, and you're going to do laboratory studies to show that you have a medication that targets a molecule that plays a role in the disease state of rheumatoid arthritis. So you've gotten through phase 1. You've got a proof of concept. Phase 2 is a small clinical research study with a relatively small number of patients to show that, again, proof of concept, you have a drug that seems useful and reasonably safe, but with the numbers of patients that we have in a phase 2 study, you haven't fulfilled the criteria to be approved. Phase 3. Phase 3 is where you, Richard, the pharmaceutical company, have to canvass people like myself and my colleagues who are treating this disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and have made the investment in the staff and infrastructure to be able to do a complex clinical research study in our office. So you've done 1, 2, and 3. You've asked me to sign on. I said, Richard, we know something about your drug. It looks really interesting. We'd like to help. Then I go to my practice. And I start asking my patients who seem to fit the criteria. And from a physician's perspective, there's a lot of yeses and nos to be asked and answered. So me and my staff have done that. We found a patient probably not dissimilar from your mom. And we said to her and her adoring son, we're so sorry that you have this illness. We're so sorry that you're suffering. You have an option. You can continue doing what you're doing, but we think the prognosis and your outcome is going to be suboptimal at best. We are now participating in a clinical trial that I find to be very hopeful. But because it's a scientific study, a portion of the patients will receive placebo, which means sugar water. And we, meaning you, and my staff and myself, it's going to be randomized, so we won't know which you're getting. We don't know if it's going to be placebo, or we don't know if it's going to be the drug. But we're going to put safety valves in place. What that means is in modern clinical research, which is one of the questions you guys are asking me, is how do you protect the patient? And the way we protect the patient is if you get randomized to the placebo, you're getting sugar water, you're not getting anything that's going to be of great value to you, the patient. But for us, the scientific community, we need to know how this drug compares to not changing therapy. It's a very important question, and that's how you answer it. As you, the patient, how am I going to be protected if I get placebo? At a certain amount of time, usually 12 weeks, give or take, is the standard. If you're not doing well, we then say we're going to now give you the active drug. Whatever it was that you took, we don't know, but we're now going to switch you to a medication and see what happens. From a scientific point of view, I know this isn't exactly for your audience. It changes how we measure the outcomes because you failed. But if you failed because of a placebo, again, it's proof of concept. We gave you sugar water. No surprise, it didn't work. So that's how clinical research is performed. So going back to the interview process for clinical research, I've identified you as a patient who would potentially benefit from this study, but it is a study. It's, you're going to be a study patient. And of course, the standard response for our patients is, oh, I'm a guinea pig. We don't like the word guinea pig, but nonetheless, it's what everybody relates to. And so to your next point, what we say is you're going to go through a very vigorous process called an informed consent. And we're going to spend as much time as we need with you and your adoring son and whomever else that you need to discuss this with to see if you want to proceed with the trial, and to give you as much knowledge as humanly possible before you enter the study. Once we've done that, you get randomized. Your medications that you've been taking prior to the study, we try to keep the same if possible, and then you get the drug or you don't get the drug. So what happened with the Remicade trial? So the Remicade trial, for all intents and purposes, the placebo patients were unblinded. Because when we gave your mom Remicade, or the people like your mom, we and they knew within a month or so.
Wow.
It was dramatic. And for the people who got placebo, and if you deal with patients the way we do, patients will say, this hurts more, this hurts less. But if you look at it from the perspective of the study, it was very clear that Remicade helped these poor people substantially. And so after we presented the data to the FDA, and I was played a significant role in that as well, because I recruited more patients in the United States of America for this study than anybody else.
Wow.
And so what I learned, again, for those of you interested in clinical research, is you really want to be the second best study, the second best site. Because if you're the first site, the FDA comes to your office.
Which is never a good thing.
Which if you've ever heard the phrase, we're from the government and we're here to help, that's not what they said. What they said was, we're here from the government, you signed this, and then you agree to let us basically do whatever we want. And that's, of course, what I did. I signed that document. And they proceeded to spend as much time as they felt necessary in our office, interviewing me, my colleagues, my staff, and going over the mounds of paperwork until they felt that, we had done a credible job.
So let me ask you some practical questions
Sure.
about that. So obviously you're being compensated for this.
Yes.
And is the patient being compensated for this?
Let's start with me. That's the easy question. So it's very expensive to do a clinical research trial because, as I said, I have to hire all these people to do mountains of paperwork. Nothing that me or my staff could possibly entertain in the course of the fact that we're also running our practice simultaneously. So there's an expensive infrastructure. Obviously, we need to be compensated for that. Otherwise, they don't get a clinical trial out of us. And then, depending on the study and the negotiation and the complexity of the study, we get reimbursed for that as well. And I've never felt that I was being bribed or any other way influenced for the good of my patients as compared to the good of the pharmaceutical industry.
Which begs the question, I think, because obviously a pharmaceutical company is going to use you, first of all, because you have a lot of patients that have that particular disease.
Correct.
I would think that the pharmaceutical company would continue to use you if you're getting good results in your clinical trials.
Well, so good results should go into quote unquote. The results are the results. And so the other steps that we take is when we bring in someone to evaluate the patient's response, we hire another person, a provider, to do what we call the physical examination of the joints, and then the staff do the history evaluation. It's much more complex than it would be in clinical practice. It involves multitudes of questions. So we try to control for that as much as we can. And since we're usually blinded in these studies, if we make everybody look like a superstar, then what the study ends up with is a study where the placebo looks just as good as the drug.
So I just want to get to your question.
Yes.
You basically imply that if you get paid, you might pad the results, right?
Right.
And the results are objective mainly.
Correct.
I know they're questionnaires, but you can discuss that it's really hard to pad the results. And the results are objective, and the subjective part of it is a questionnaire that the patients fill out.
But wait a minute, I just want to back up. I'm not hearing anything that's objective. I'm hearing everything is subjective. So is there a test that you can do that says this is the result versus the patient says, "Oh, I feel better"?
That's great.
So I want you to go through that. That's very important. What you do is basically you turn subjective feeling into objective results.
But the other point that the doctor made, which I think is brilliant, is the fact that if he wanted to go into everyone's record and say, "Oh, they're feeling better, they're feeling great, they're feeling fantastic," that can't happen if half the group is taking the placebo.
Right.
That is correct. You're both correct. So let's go spend a little more time so our audience can understand this. If they have rheumatoid arthritis or if they have a loved one or family member who has suffering from this. So rheumatoid arthritis lends itself to objective measurements. It's called swollen and tender joint count. If you're a rheumatologist, it's just part and parcel of what you're being presented with at a meeting. Every time you go to a meeting. It's the standard. And so you count the number of joints prior to treatment, at the beginning of treatment, and then obviously subsequent to that. And you count the number of swollen and tender joints. And it's a little tricky. I won't burden you with all those details, but it does give you what you're concerned about, which is an objective measurement. And there's a threshold in our discipline for what constitutes a significant change. So that I would say rheumatologists feel comfortable that we're presenting to whomever else is interested in what we do for research as a reasonably objective measurement. The other objective measurements are laboratories. So you can measure inflammation by blood tests. Like everything else in medicine, it's an imperfect science. So you just have to understand that. But did we find with these types of medications that there was a significant drop in inflammation levels when you start these medications? Absolutely yes. And of course, that can't be, it's a number. It is what it is. And then third, we do x-rays. So as we discussed with your mom, if you have unchecked severe rheumatoid arthritis, there's going to be progressive malalignment of the joints. And when you x-ray those joints, the radiologist or whomever's reading the x-ray will be able to give in graphic detail what's happened joint by joint. And we have a very codified system for measuring that as well. And so those measurements, if you go to a rheumatology meeting and they're presenting data on a rheumatoid arthritis study, you, the rheumatologist, are going to expect to be shown that data and what the significance of those changes are.
We wanted to take a quick break to remind you about our sponsor, findagreatattorney.com. Dealing with the aftermath of an accident or injury can be overwhelming. And the last thing you want to worry about is finding the right lawyer. Findagreatattorney.com simplifies the process by connecting you with one of the top attorneys in your area who specializes in your specific type of case. Whether you've been injured in a car accident, suffered a slip and fall, or experienced medical malpractice, Findagreatattorney.com has a network of experienced lawyers ready to help. And remember, their service is completely free, so you can focus on your recovery without worrying about the cost of legal representation. If you or someone you know needs legal assistance, don't hesitate to visit findagreatattorney.com and let them match you with one of the best lawyers in your area for your needs.
So let's talk from the patient perspective, right?
Sure.
So they're deciding whether they should do this or not.
Yes.
And you said that you've seen dramatic results already
Right.
with this new medication. And they might get a placebo.
Yes.
When would they? And you said that in a month or two, it might change. They might get the real stuff if they get the placebo.
They have an escape clause, yes.
Okay. So, and also, how often do you see the patients when you start them on clinical trial, and when does the escape clause come out?
So it varies trial by trial, but what Richard was, I'm just going to go back to Richard's question is, how do we justify getting reimbursed from the pharmaceutical industry? Not only is there dramatically more paperwork, but there's significant number of visits. And because you, the pharmaceutical industry, you, the researcher, you, the patient, want to know that we're collecting data, at week 1 or week 2 or et cetera. Whereas if you were in my practice and I started you on a medication, I might say, let me see you back in a couple of months. So clinical research, we're spending dramatically more time with the patient. We, of course, also includes my research coordinators and other team members.
And I'm not suggesting that you get paid money and that's unfair. What I'm trying to look at from someone who's looking at this thing very critically is this really a system where pharmaceutical companies, and I'm not suggesting it's you, go to doctors to get a drug approved and it's all about the money?
Right. It's a fair question. And I totally respect the question. You're not the first person to ask it. But I would say in our field, rheumatology, although there is that potential allure, there's enough safety checks in place that I don't think you'd be considered a credible site within 1 or 2 studies.
So let me ask you this question, and I'm not suggesting you again, but and I'm trying to think about, because you have the placebo and you have the objective findings, it's difficult to game the system. So my question is, how can you game the system?
How can you game the system? With difficulty. Also, the people that we hire, our clinical researchers, they have to go through extensive testing and they have to sign ethical documents saying that they're not going to do what you say. They're not beholden to us other than, getting a paycheck. And I can tell you all of my clinical researchers advanced to other pharmaceutical companies and received what I assume were more favorable paychecks.
So the other question...
So they're not, they're not in on it.
Right, and that's what I was going to say. At the end of this clinical trial, do you care if they get the result they want or they don't get the result they want for purposes of the trial, not for purposes of your patients? Obviously, you want to see a medicine that'll help your patients, but is there something that you're keeping track of in your head where...
Yeah, so as we say in Queens, it is what it is. And so that's the Queen's answer. Now I'll give you a more formal answer. And so have I ever participated in a study which we call a negative study? Either the results were unfavorable from side effects or from not the desired outcome. And the answer is yes. And we were hopeful that this particular drug would help this particular disease state, and we can go into details if you'd like. It's public record. And when we went to the meetings and read the publications for this one particular drug, not only was it favorable, they said, "Oh, this drug makes so much sense for rheumatoid arthritis that, or for spondylitis, that it's going to be the game changer." And that's why, although logic and reason and hopefulness are all wonderful attributes, without the data, you have nothing. And that's why it is what it is, still makes sense all these years later. So I've participated in negative studies. I was sad because I was hopeful. But from the perspective of the pharmaceutical industry, they were the ones who gambled their money. I got paid regardless.
What percentage of the placebo patients get better by taking the placebo?
Yeah, it depends on the study. But, even in the most severe diseases, there is going to be a small percentage of patients who, during the course of the study, will do better during their placebo phase. Now, what I would say to you, since it's such a quizzical response, is they're still getting medication. So when you get through to get the study medication in an arthritis study, you're on what we call background medicine. And the background medicine could be a variety of things. The medication dosages have to be stable for a certain amount of time so that it doesn't interfere with the interpretation. But these patients aren't going untreated. They're just not getting the additional treatment. So in the course of these disease states, people have their ups and downs, as we all know, as you know. And so that may get captured during that phase of the study. And so, we anticipate a small amount of patients with severe disease can still have a decent response.
Wow.
So let's talk about the patient's perspective again. Why would I want to do this study? Because I might get the placebo.
Yes.
And that's going to piss me off.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. And so we'll go back to the Remicade study, since that was a pivotal study for me as well. It was what I would call, and please, podcast people, don't take offense, a much easier sales pitch. Because at that time, there really wasn't a great deal of effective medication for rheumatoid arthritis. So you came into my office, I know you. You've been my patient for a while. That's one of the reasons I asked you to do the study, is because we have a relationship. And you and I already know that you've called me up many times to say, I'm doing poorly, help me. And so it becomes much easier to convince patients at that point to take the gamble of going on placebo, especially because, we've built in a safety valve to get them to a drug if they are continuing to do poorly.
Yeah, talk about that. Talk about how the process of what we call
unblinding.
Yeah.
So Dr. Michaelis, you have bad rheumatoid arthritis. We're so sorry that you're not doing well. We're asking you to participate in the study. I'm very hopeful for this drug. The previous studies show that it looks like it should help, but we won't know that with reasonable certainty without the study. We need the study to get this drug approved. And the pharmaceutical company and the FDA have asked me to ask my patients to participate. I feel you're the right patient to do this. And I'm going to be there all the time. If there's any questions, you have access to me. Actually, you'll have more access to me in a study than you would otherwise. My team is going to work with you. Every question that you ask is going to be answered, and you're going to go through a very rigorous process before we give you the medication.
Now, I want the medicine. I don't want the placebo.
So let's fast forward. So when we were recruiting for the Remicade study, you, the patient, didn't have a lot of options. And that's what made the sales pitch relatively easy, because you understood that with severe rheumatoid, the outcomes could be very, very poor. Now, let's fast forward 15 years. Okay, so it's now 2015. And now we have easily a half dozen medications approved for rheumatoid arthritis that were not approved in 1999. And these drugs are now considered the standard of care. The insurance companies know that these drugs are, for people with moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis, are going to be superior the vast majority of times compared to the previous standard of care. So then I say to you, Dr. Michaelis, you have moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis. You need an additional medication. The medications that we've started with are not satisfactory. I'm giving you the option of participating in one of my clinical research trials, or if you'd like, I can ask my insurance expert to go through the pre-certification process, and we should have the drug available to you in a couple of weeks. Would you rather wait months to see the effects or wait a couple of weeks?
What do they usually say?
Everybody says, give me the drug.
So you get them the drug.
And now they're on an FDA-approved drug, thanks to the pharmaceutical industry, thanks to the patient volunteers, thanks to the clinical researchers and their staff. We now have a large number of drugs that are approved for the treatment of moderate to severe arthritis. So we're going to go back to Richard, who's representing the pharmaceutical industry so adroitly. And so now the pharmaceutical industry, is saying, wait a second, Dr. Spiegel, I've been working with you for the last decade plus, and we've brought these medications to market. We've helped tens of thousands of people, probably more than that. And now you're telling me that you won't be able to find patients in your practice for my medication. What should I do next? Well, Richard, here's what you did. What you did is you moved to other countries that are not as fortunate as those of us living in the United States, where access to medical care, access to these biologics, which are costly, are much more difficult. So you go to Europe, you go to Eastern Europe, you go to South America, you go to Asia, and you recruit patients from other demographics where their access to these medications is not readily available. And so the newer studies, although they do have United States sites in them, probably the majority of patients are being recruited outside the United States. That's how you solve that dilemma.
But if I get a placebo, I eventually will get the medication.
That is right. So you may say to yourself, Dr. Spiegel, I really believe in what you're doing. And I'd like to, obviously get better. And what you're telling me is if I go into the study and after a certain number of weeks that I haven't responded, you in the pharmaceutical industry will find a way to get me the medication directly.
Okay. So just will be a delay.
Right.
Sure.
But since we want to speak to the perspective of our patients and their family and loved ones, the people like myself are much less likely to want to contribute to an arthritis study because we are victims of our own success, if that makes sense to you guys.
Right.
We've gotten the drugs approved. They're safe and effective. They've changed lives.
So why don't you talk about some success stories?
Well, so let's go back to the Remicade study. And this is public knowledge, so we're not violating anybody's privacy. So the pharmaceutical company was very pleased with the work that we did. And so the drug was approved. And so you're the pharmaceutical industry and you want to share this information with as many people as possible. Dr. Spiegel, is there any patient in your that completed the study that was a success story that wouldn't mind going on camera and traveling around the country to speak to other people with rheumatoid arthritis, because it's much more impactful for patients to hear this from a fellow sufferer than it is from the physician for a variety of reasons that we've already discussed. So we're going to call her Mary. So I approached Mary, who still lives in Ridgefield. And so Mary's first love was doing dance recitals for the local nursing homes around the holidays. And she showed me many pictures of her and her friends and their outfits, and they all sewed their own outfits, and they were really cute. But with her moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis, she could no longer do dance recitals. That was a major quality of life factor for her. She performed the study. She's back in costume. And so I said to the pharmaceutical company, I think I have the right person to present to her fellow sufferers to at least share her story to see if they'd be willing to go on this medication that's now approved. So Mary was a huge success.
Wow, that's great.
So let's jump to another topic area, and that is, from your perspective, what are the biggest flaws in the current healthcare and pharmaceutical systems that affect patient protection and costs?
So as far as patient protection goes, we share the information, the pros and cons, especially before we prescribe a drug like Remicade. Spend a couple of visits with the patient, making sure that they have the big picture. And the FDA will actually read the pamphlets, and they partially write these pamphlets. These are FDA authorized and authored. And they spend a great deal of time, not appropriately I might add, going through the potential risks. So there's a great deal of information to be had both from the provider, from the pamphlets, and if you watch evening news television, from the commercials, which are also authorized and co-authored by the FDA, believe it or not. And then, of course, we now live in the modern era, and it doesn't take very long to access information. So in my contemporary look at this, there's a great deal of information. Some of my colleagues would argue, perhaps, Michael, perhaps you're doing a disservice providing all this information because a good deal of the information that's shared is risk and potential negative outcomes. Well, again, it is what it is. You have to share the information. So I think our patients are being protected from the aspect of information pros and cons. I think we're doing a good job. Of course, I'm biased. What do I think needs to improve? And if you canvassed 100 rheumatologists, I believe 98 would say this. It's the cost. It's the cost and then the attendant work that needs to be performed by the providers to make the medication affordable for that patient. It is a problem. We are not going to solve that problem today. But that's what I think the vast majority of our colleagues would tell you.
So is there a strategy that could be implemented that could reduce the cost without having a negative impact upon the treatment?
Absolutely.
What is that?
So I've convinced you and your mom to go on this medicine. And then what I say to you is one of the first things that I consider, and this is speaking for myself, not necessarily for my colleagues, one of the first things that I consider is the cost and how will I pick a medication, since they're all costly, that will fit your insurance and financial needs. And that's literally the first question I ask. I then ask my oracle, my expert. Her name is Shannon. And I say, Shannon, here's what I'm proposing. Here's what you need to know about the patient, because Shannon understands the risks and how to do this as well as anyone I know. And how do we get this medication to be made affordable? Sometimes it could be done through the insurance, but the pharmaceutical industry, many of them are very generous when it comes to underwriting the cost of these medications. And so our pharmaceutical colleagues are very helpful in getting a drug. Obviously, it has to be indicated, and we've had to gone through all the pros and cons, and they give us a little bit of paperwork to assure that we've done that. And then many times, not 100%, but many times, we're able to get the medication underwritten by the pharmaceutical company.
So let's talk about the future of medical research and healthcare. What do you see as the most promising innovations that are on the horizon for both rheumatology and medical research?
So in rheumatology, not that there isn't room for improvement. There is. These drugs are not 100% effective. But speaking from my knowledge of what's in the pipeline, we're pretty close. We've done a great job of providing medications that are safe and effective for people that would have previously become disabled. It's a sea change. It's a miracle. And I could give you more anecdotes to that effect. I'll give you one. So I had this young woman, because rheumatoid arthritis, one of the peak demographics is young women, women in their 20s, 30s. And so, of course, these women are want to have a family or have a family, and now they have this disease that is having a great deal of impact on how they want to live their life. So back in the early 2000s, we had this patient who severe rheumatoid arthritis, and we gave her the biologic, and all her joints got better but one. She had had the disease so long that her elbow just became damaged, and the medication couldn't undo the damage. So it turns out that fellowship-trained elbow surgeons are a rarity. And at the time, the greater Danbury community did not have one. So I sent her down to the city and it doesn't matter, one of the universities. And I said, you got to go see the elbow guy. And I found an elbow guy, wrote him a little letter of introduction. So the elbow guy calls me back up within a week after seeing her. And he goes, Dr. Spiegel, I know this woman has rheumatoid arthritis because I'm the elbow guy. But I took the liberty of examining the rest of her joints, and I can't find any more rheumatoid. You guys got to tell more people about this. This is a big deal. And I said to him, we're trying. Stay tuned. It's going to reach out to everybody. And that's what it was like in the beginning of the miracle. We had to get the word out. We did.
So do you ever envision a time when instead of developing a medication that can reduce the symptoms or get everything in check, that you could eradicate RA before it happens?
So that's a great question, and the answer is yes. So a rheumatoid arthritis vaccine has been proposed, and it's actually been in development for a while. I have not kept tabs on it, but that's exactly the concept that you're asking. The first part of that question is, this is not like a vaccine that you would just give out as a public health issue. This is a vaccine that you're targeting a specific population. So the first thing that these people have to do, the company has to do, is who's the appropriate target. And
who would be the target?
So as of now, it's people with an early presentation of the disease. We have definitions about what early disease looks like, so that's been codified. And they're working on, administering the vaccine at the early stage.
Is there genetic testing that can tell us if a patient is going to develop rheumatoid arthritis later on?
So, that's one of the holy grails. And of course, we have many genetic markers, but none that reaches the point that you're asking, where you have this genetic marker, therefore we have to act on it.
And how would you have a clinical trial on a vaccine for somebody who might be predisposed to get it? How do you say whether it's successful or it's not, because you don't know who's going to get it and who's not going to get it?
Yeah, so that's the dilemma. So, when we first were presented this data, that's the question everybody asked. And of course, we look at it from our perspective, the providers, the givers of the vaccine, because obviously we're going to be the ones to give it. And that's why they kind of changed the approach to early disease. With early disease, which is a different disease, it's not the same as established moderate to severe RA. It's a different actor, but at least now we have something that we can potentially measure. If this comes to fruition, I will cite you as the reference. Oh, it's going to be a while.
So is there something fascinating or amazing that our audience could take away from any of the research that you've done or studies or anything where people would be like, oh, my God?
Yes.
Other than the fact that you're an amazing doctor.
Well, no, that's not the point, because, obviously you're going to have to deal with these people are going to have to deal with their providers. I think the message is, especially for lay people, especially the way these commercials are written, is it's very hard for a layperson to fully assess risk and benefit. And especially when the commercials use words like cancer and death. Those are very bad outcomes. And so patients will say to us, gee, it's bad enough to have arthritis. I don't want to have cancer and I don't want to die. So it takes a great deal of effort to go through that information in great detail, because the information and the detail are very reassuring. But what I would emphasize to the audience is, don't turn away from these medications if you think you need it. based on the information you're seeing on television or in print ads. That's just the government wanting you to understand justifiably that these medications, like all medications, have risk. But you need to understand the risk in greater detail. That means talking to a provider or a rheumatologist. And then you have to get a much deeper understanding of the risk of not taking these medications. That's what I want to bring to the audience.
You know, and I think the other message is, if you look at my mom 30 years ago until today, I think what I'm hearing from you is, you know, for people that have some type of a illness or some type of a malady like this, is that there is great hope because things are evolving very, very quickly.
Absolutely.
So as our time together is drawing to an end, I would just like to ask you, are there some thoughts that you would like to share to kind of tie a bow on this box here?
If you or your loved one feels that they have rheumatoid arthritis or systemic arthritis, you have to get to the rheumatologist. That's easier said than done now. There's a nationwide shortage, but if you're persistent and have the help of your primary care provider, it can be done sooner rather than later.
Dr. Michael Spiegel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.